Good afternoon, Golden Rams. I am Dr. Ed Lord. It's nice to know that we're all connected again, trying in this COVID environment to have our sense of culture and our continued attempts to remain a group. No matter what we are, we have some of our alumni, I understand, from Seth Birch, who's working the system today. We have some alumni coming in. We welcome all of those folks back to Westchester in whatever form we have it in. We have some current students. We're also welcoming you and looking forward to seeing you in some form or other, probably this form, in just a few weeks. And I understand from Seth that we also have some new students coming in. You are certainly welcome. Happy to have you as Golden Rams and looking forward to having you as a part of our group. And speaking of part of our group, I want to introduce our guest for today. This is our College of Arts and Humanities speaker series. This is the first of our the ones for the communications group. And we're very lucky to have a veteran of our department that goes back to class of 2010. Do I have that correct? 2010 is right,
That's
which
right.
would be a while ago. It doesn't seem like that. It seems like just a few short years ago, but time flies in these environments. But Brenden Lee comes to us from the class of 2010. Since that time, he's had a variety of very interesting career options, career paths that he's going to talk to us about today. He also went on for a master's at my alma mater, Syracuse University, where he went to the Newhouse School, correct?
Right.
What years were those, Brenden?
2012, I graduated.
2012, okay, all right. But since that time, he has had sort of a gold standard in terms of his selection of choices of places to work. That comes from all the hard work that he's done, but it's quite an impressive series of positions. Brenden, if we could, welcome to you. And congratulations on the birth of your daughter, Harper. We're thrilled about that as well. Future Golden Ram.
Yes.
Can you take us through your post-Westchester time, and I guess post-Syracuse as well, but the series of steps you went through and the kinds of jobs that you had?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks again for having me. Really happy to be here. And thank you all for joining today. So after Westchester, I took a year off and worked for the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia doing public affairs in their communications and public affairs department. So I did a mix of external and internal communications. Having left Westchester, though, I knew, my goal was always to work in sports and to find some way to do something in the sports industry. I'm growing up a huge sports fan in the Philadelphia area. And after 9 or 10 months at the Fed, it was great work. It was really interesting, able to get my feet wet in the industry. I knew I was going to go to grad school at some point, so figured I'd jump in and do it at that point. So that was what led me to grad school at Syracuse. Spent a year there, and even in my time there, I did internships at their athletic department. Did a few other internships at a local TV station. So along the way, I was always trying to find ways to boost my resume. I think that's the biggest thing in communications. In addition to school, looking for ways to show people you've been there and done that. After leaving Syracuse, the old-fashioned way, just applying through HR channels, I earned a position at the Philadelphia Eagles in their public relations department, and I spent a year there. It wasn't a great year. It was Andy Reid's last year, so we went 4-12. It was a big bummer to work for my hometown team and have them go 4-12. And see my longtime coach go. But it was, a lot of unique challenges. I saw coaches get fired. I saw Andy Reid's, unfortunately, his son passed away my first week on the job. So from a communications perspective, I saw a lot of different things, in my time there. Towards the end of my run at the Philadelphia Eagles, I knew it was just a seasonal position. So I knew my time was coming up, and I started doing a lot of networking. And I would just reach out to folks on LinkedIn who had backgrounds that looked like things I wanted to do. And I would just email them and say, hey, we'd love to pick your brain for 5 or 10 minutes on the phone. And one of those phone conversations actually ended up with a guy who worked in PR at the NFL league office in New York. And at the end of our conversation, he said, Brenden, we have a job that's not going to be posted, but think you should apply for it. So I sent him my resume, and just by networking, I found my way to the NFL league office, where I spent 4 years working in football information. So when Peyton Manning or Tom Brady broke records, I was writing press releases and notes about that type of stuff. I did a lot of work on health and safety, as well as our retired player communications, because there's a perception that once players leave the NFL, they're not thought about anymore, and the league doesn't take care of them. And so I did a lot of public relations work to combat that narrative. And then, as a young professional, one of the tough things, particularly in the sports industry, is trying to find your way up the ladder and trying to navigate, working where you want to work, but making sure you're always continuing to grow and learn. And it was just a tough, slow road there. People don't ever leave jobs in the NFL unless, they die, basically. They're there forever. And so I knew if I wanted to grow and continue to advance in my career, I probably needed to take a step elsewhere, which is what led me to Twitter. So I've been at Twitter now for 4 years. I've had 2 different roles. My first role, I was leading our sports communications work. We have a sports partnerships team that works with the leagues, teams, and athletes to help them use Twitter, live stream on Twitter, anything you can think of. I was doing PR around that. And then about 2 years ago, I started to raise my hand for just traditional corporate communications work on a project basis, just to diversify my resume a bit. And my bosses said, instead of doing this on a project basis, why not do it full time? And so it was a bit scary in that I had never done, traditional corp comms before. And it was completely out of sports where my comfort zone was, but I took the challenge, and it's been a really great opportunity to grow and learn in a completely different area. I love Twitter. I know I love the company. So if I was going to do a completely different skill set, I'd rather do it somewhere where I knew I love working already, which is what I've been doing for the past 2 years.
That's quite a trajectory. I'm sure it's been bumps and bruises and missed turns along the way. It sounds, NFL, the Fed, things like that. It sounds fantastic, and it is, but there had to be times when it wasn't going as smoothly as you would have liked it to go. You mentioned networking, and a lot of our students, our alums, our current students, our students to be, they hear that word all the time, but it can be intimidating. You're just out of school, you're in school, and you feel like I'm not as big a professional as these folks. What mindset do you bring to that, Brenden? How do you network, and what's that like for you?
I think first is just getting over the awkwardness of it. It's awkward for everybody, but ultimately these are people who have been in the same shoes as you have been. One of the things that I do now, I'm very cognizant about replying to everybody in some way or form, offering a phone call, offering being able to help on email questions, because I remember what it was like as a young student reaching out to people. It's nerve-wracking, but the way you get better at it, you just continue to do it. And I think one of the best ways is using all the social platforms there are today. There's so much information out there. So you can find people who have backgrounds very similar to you. Go on LinkedIn and search through their careers and see where they've been. And, just reach out and say, hey, you look like a really interesting person. You have an interesting background. I would love to pick your brain. Would love to talk to you. But at the end of the day, you have to put yourself out there, and you have to speak up and tell people how they can help you and what you like. But I've learned people love to talk about themselves, and that's why I'm sitting here doing this right now. And so if you give them the opportunity to talk about themselves, they'll tell you about their backgrounds, their careers, different tips, and that's how you get on their radar.
Great. Speaking of platforms, the chat session is open on our Zoom. So anyone who has any particular questions for Brenden or wants to do a shout out from his class or anything like that, please feel free to join in on the chat function. Brenden, do you feel as though you've had a master plan, or as though there's been a set of goals career-wise for you, or have you happened to it, or has it happened to you, or how's that worked?
A little of both. One of the biggest things I've learned along the way is that there is no master plan or trajectory. What you think is your dream when you're graduating a school will completely change in those 10 years that you've left school, and it'll change again in the next 5. You just continue to grow and learn, and you figure things out as you go. I thought I was always in school looking for the perfect path. I didn't have a full-time job right after graduation, which really bummed me out. And I had to work to supplement some of my income. I worked at a hotel, and I worked in retail for a little bit, as well as doing those internships and those jobs at the Fed. There's no perfect path. And, I made it to sports, and I made it to the NFL, one of the biggest sports leagues in the world, and went to 4 Super Bowls while working there, and did a whole lot of things that people never get to do, and then realize working in sports day to day probably isn't my dream. There's no such thing as a dream job. You just have to accept where you are, where your feet are at the time, and make the best of it and figure out what'll make you happy and figure out ways to grow and advance. So I guess that's my long-winded saying there's no master plan. It's just figuring out what makes you happy at the time and what you think you might like a year, 2 years, 5 years down the road.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Let's talk skill sets, if you would, or particular things that the sort of day in the life. How are you spending your day? What are you doing? And what kind of skills would you suggest students develop in order to do those things?
No matter where you are in communications, writing well goes a long way. Right now, I work for Twitter, so my writing is completely different than it was at the NFL. I'm writing tweets now. I'm writing really short, fun blog posts. At the NFL, I was writing more traditional press releases, and at the Fed, it was really dry financial writing. But ultimately, writing will carry you, and it'll help you stick out along the way. It sticks out like a sore thumb when people send in resumes or cover letters or sending emails that just are poorly written. So you don't want to be one of those people. And I think one of the things from taking your PR class that I didn't truly appreciate until getting out into the world was you have to read the news and you have to be up on what's going on every day, particularly in PR, whether it's your company or the industry or just society in general. If you don't think it will touch you or your company, a situation probably will. And I think, this summer, unfortunately, kind of showed that for a lot of companies, whether it was the pandemic or the social justice issues, every company was confronted with things that they didn't think they would ever touch. And PR people around the country are having to work on inclusion of diversity issues that they never thought they would touch, or figuring out how to respond to a pandemic and laying off people, and how your company is adapting to these new challenges of working remotely. There are a lot of different things that PR people today are having to work on that they didn't have to 6 months ago.
I can feel some of our students right through the Zoom rolling their eyes over the idea of staying up on the news, but you know how important it is and how important it is to your intellectual development, ongoing intellectual development as well. And we got a little message into our chat session from the dean, Jen Bacon, saying, yes, writing, thank you. Just want to tell the students that was not a plant for Brenden. We didn't rehearse that and say, here's the things we want you to stress. He said, those are the things that go on in his life. So that's important. So that's great. That makes sense. Let's talk mentorship. During your undergraduate years, you came to my office, you came to other professors' offices, you looked for assistance there. And one of the things you trained to do was to not stop learning and not stop developing. So after you left the university, you were in a different setting in terms of mentorship, where you're in a professional setting, and that's not always a logical or a smooth approach. Who were your mentors and how did you develop them, and what is your relationship like with them?
Some mentors come from just naturally, you're working with people every day and you gravitate towards certain people. And then there's others where, again, it's almost a scaled down version of networking. Networking doesn't stop once you get into a company. When I was at the NFL, I was able to work with a lot of seasoned professionals because, as I mentioned, people don't ever leave those jobs, but there are a few who took me under their wing and let me shadow them, just let me come in their office and vent, because there are times in your career where you're going to be frustrated, and it's just nice to be able to go to somebody who's above you, who's been through it, and just vent and say, sometimes this sucks. And obviously you can't always do that with your boss. Sometimes you can, depending on the culture of your organization, but just seeking out people who, again, have different, backgrounds or similar backgrounds to you. Sometimes it's getting away from your department. So maybe there's just a leader who is in another part of the building who can take time out to have coffee with you once a month. It's just finding people who you just feel comfortable with and who are okay to let you vent or pick their brains. That stuff goes a long way. And then in terms of mentors outside of the building, outside of your immediate role, it's the networking again. People, once you get into certain roles, they'll reach out on LinkedIn, or you reach out on LinkedIn. I've been lucky that, having the Eagles or NFL logo or Twitter's logo on my LinkedIn, kind of helps me, get into the inbox of certain people. But, I would say if you have a job, you're never prettier than when you do have a job. So, when you're going out to your internships, use those emails that they're giving you and email people in other industries, because when they see it from an at Federal Reserve Bank email or at Twitter email, wherever you're interning, they're more likely to respond to you. You utilize LinkedIn and find Westchester alums who are in positions like myself, or in New York, or I'm sure there's Westchester alums in Baltimore and LA, elsewhere. Just find people with similar backgrounds, because those are the people who are first going to want to look out for you.
And now that you're entering the phase of your career where you're probably doing some mentoring yourself, and identifying talent and bringing people along, what does it do for the mentor, not just the mentee? You're talking about the things that advantages to you working with them. Why would a mentor get involved with you? Or when you're mentoring people, what does it do for you to do that?
I'd say on a personal level, it feels good to help other people. And I remember what it was like being a student and how tough it was. So from a personal perspective, it's great to see somebody grow and learn and take similar steps that you've taken. And then on a professional side, that's how you develop your pipeline of future candidates for work. People who reach out to me and ask for a phone call, and I'll talk to for 15, 30 minutes, and send an email afterwards saying thank you for just taking the time to talk to them. Those are the people who I'll remember for job posts. I'll send them a job post, say, hey, we're hiring here or there in this role. You may want to apply. Obviously, it doesn't guarantee you'll get the role, but you have an upper hand than other people do, just because you reached out and you're one of the people who I know you're doing what you can be doing to get better and to learn and to figure out what other people are doing in their careers to be successful.
So proactivity is a big attitude attribute.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Twitter, you're in the tech world. Now it's been 10 years out, which is a considerable chunk of time.
Mm-hmm.
How are the technologies changing? Where are they heading, to the degree that you can tell? What's going on that students should be looking at tech-wise? This is a Dr. Thompson question, of course. Tech-wise, what are the things they should be looking at, spending time in, just hanging around?
I think all the major ones they're probably on already, Twitter and LinkedIn, particularly for professional use. One of the big misconceptions about Twitter is that I hear a lot of people say, oh, I don't tweet, or I don't know what to tweet, so I can't use Twitter. And that's not true. Companies just want to know that you're able to navigate the service and you know where to go to seek out information, particularly in being in comms. The reporters you're working with are using Twitter. So learning the things that they're talking about, that they're passionate about, that's how you know what ultimately you're going to pitch them when you get into a job. Using LinkedIn to understand, just from a pure professional development standpoint, what companies are looking for in different roles. So reading job descriptions, but also reading the backgrounds of the people who are in the roles that have been hired. That's how you learn how to tailor your resume, how to tailor your cover letter, those type of things. And I think, video is not going away. It's becoming bigger and bigger. So I think a lot of the companies will start to look for candidates who are really creative and can utilize video platforms and utilize video in their different social channels, things like that.
Makes sense. We're getting some questions in the chat room about internships, which is obviously of interest to incoming students and current students, and in some cases, graduates who haven't found anything yet or are still thinking about internships. Can you walk us through your process? How many overall did you have?
When I was at Westchester, I think I had 2 or 3 internships.
Okay, that's wonderful.
The Philadelphia Soul, former Arena Football League team, and then Clear Channel Communications doing radio production were the 2 that stick out when I was there.
And can you walk us through the process in terms of, we have an extensive internship program in terms of what's available to students, but some students are looking for things beyond that or have some connections they want to work out. Can you walk us through the process of everything from your initial contact with them to securing the internship, and then of course maintaining the contacts afterwards?
Sure. I'd say I think I went about it both ways when I was at Westchester. My Philadelphia Soul internship, I actually wasn't through the Westchester program. I just happened to find that one, apply, and got lucky enough late in the summer before their season started. But then my Clear Channel one was through, I think, your program, where we did our, I think it was monthly classes or something like that, where we came in and talked about what we were doing in internships. The process, everybody's a little bit different in that what they're looking for. So when I was going through school, it was tough to feel like, this one requires that you give me credit or you don't give me credit, or being in comms, a lot of times when I was coming up, you weren't getting paid. I'm curious if that's changed, having paid internships anymore. But the biggest thing is finding things that you think you would like and just diving in and trying it. One of the things I found is that I probably didn't want to do radio and TV stuff every day because of the Clear Channel internship. It's a valuable, great experience, but I figured I could focus my intention on more of the PR type stuff coming out of school and after graduation because I had that internship. But I'll never give back that experience because I've been lucky enough to use some of those skills when I was at the NFL. They had me do voiceover work. That wasn't part of my PR job, but because I had the internship experience at Clear Channel, I was able to leverage that into just doing side projects. And then in terms of the internship and leveraging that to future jobs, my boss at the Philadelphia Soul, we've kept in contact for 10 plus years now. And I see him every year at the Super Bowl. And he's in a completely different job. He works at a PR firm now. And one of his main clients is Nationwide's dog insurance, and they send him to the Super Bowl every year, because one of their spokespeople, I think, was Dan Marino. And so even though he's not working in a sports job anymore, and I'm not working in a traditional sports job anymore, we still meet every year for coffee at the Super Bowl because we had that experience 10 years ago. And he's been a great mentor along the way.
I got to stop you. Did you say dog insurance?
Pet insurance. Yeah, it's big business.
See, you come on these Zooms to learn things like that. That's good. Now, students are challenged. I'll use the positive word, challenged by this virus situation. And it's made it very difficult to go through their usual channels. Everything is disrupted by that. And yet students still have opportunities to do things and sort of shape their own careers. What should students, undergraduate students now, or students coming into the program, how should they be spending their time? What can they do to sharpen their saw and become more marketable?
I think, while it's tough that we're not in offices anymore, the playing field is almost leveling out a bit because people are having to resort to using Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn, using Slack and different platforms like that for chat. And so the people who traditionally rose to the top in the offices because they just had a louder voice than others, everybody has the same voice now, having to use these virtual platforms, and you're able to market yourself in a way that you weren't necessarily in a boardroom or in a classroom. So I think just being able to utilize these different technologies, being able to stay up again on what's happening in different industries, that stuff goes a long way. I think also you're able to learn a lot more about companies right now that you probably want to work for as a young professional, figuring out who's really adapted and thrived in this situation, who hasn't faltered just because they weren't able to go into an office every day, who is taking the learnings of figuring out, hey, we can be really productive and be flexible at home or in remote environments. So you don't have to come to the office every day, even when we do go back, or we want you to be a little more creative. You don't have to do things this way because we've always done it that way. As a young professional, that type of stuff, I think, makes a difference. You're not going to get paid a ton when you're first leaving school, and the hours are going to be long. So figure out places that value your work-life balance, value creativity, and being able to do different things and utilize these platforms. I think those type of things you should be on the lookout for.
Has this environment, this situation, been a plus for Twitter?
Definitely a plus for Twitter. Our culture was pretty flexible and it was much more relaxed than a lot of other places I've been anyway. But we've we went to work from home about the same time everybody else did, maybe a little bit earlier. We've already announced that people can continue remote working for as long as they want, even after we open offices back up again. So, you know, we're very much about decentralized work and remote work, and people can work anywhere that they feel most comfortable, because maybe their situation isn't best in an office in San Francisco or New York or London, but they work better in Philadelphia areas. But that's where the talent is, and we'd rather have you working for us remotely in Philadelphia than figuring out you have to uproot your family and go to San Francisco or something like that. And just in terms of everyday conversation on Twitter, it's through the roof right now. You know, people are coming to Twitter to learn about COVID-19 and what's going on and the advances and where the numbers are. You know, we're heading into a really busy November election cycle where people can't get into buildings or big venues anymore. The conventions next week aren't going to be traditional, but you can bet a lot of conversations going to be happening on Twitter because they can't have those traditional in-person meetings anymore.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. And speaking of upheaval and changes in society and things that are going on, we certainly have seen the BLM movement in the last 6 months, 8 months or so, and the increased discussion of diversity issues. Do you see that working out in the workplace? How is that affecting things in your life and in the world around you?
I think for the first time, people are being confronted with it. Businesses are being confronted with it, and it's not going away. Even in my role here at Twitter, media is much more focused on representation in the workforce. And before, it was good enough for a company to say, "Oh, we have, you know, a resource group for Blacks or Latinx employees or the LGBTQ community." But now, that's not good enough just to say you have that. You have to have representation and representation among leadership. I think there's a lot of focus on that right now. So you know, it's an important piece. You know, at Twitter, we say if we want to be as representative as the people who use our service, and we're Twitter is in every country around the world in every language. And people of all hues and backgrounds use Twitter. So we want to make sure that those same type of people are working on the service, because how do we make sure that our platform serves everybody unless every perspective is taken into consideration?
Interesting. And again, we invite everyone to lean in here and be proactive, and please throw some questions up on chat, or if you have any observations, put them up on the chat as well. We want this to be a dialogue, not just a one-way conversation in this. So you don't see the movement, the diversity movement, you don't see it as a short-term thing. You see it as something that's going to be ongoing.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. In terms of not that I'm sure you're happy at Twitter, but in terms of where things are going for you, do you want to move up the ladder where you are, or are you thinking about going in some very different directions here?
Mm-hmm.
Are you thinking other directions down the road for yourself?
I've learned that never say never. And I kind of just take it as it comes to an extent. You know, New York was the one place I told people I would never work or live when I was in school. And now I've been here 8 years between the NFL and Twitter. I always thought I wanted to work in sports, and I work at Twitter now in a traditional corporate communications role. Who knows what the next role is? You know, I for now, I'm definitely happy at Twitter. And I think one of the best things about our culture is that if they have good people here, they rather good people move into different roles within the company than to have them leave altogether, which is kind of how I wound up in my role now. I was doing the sports role, as I mentioned before, and you know, I knew I wanted my resume to be a little bit more diversified. I didn't only want to be known as a sports guy. And, you know, instead of having me do things on a project basis, they said, just do it full time. You know, and there's not a hesitancy about you jumping into completely different things and learning different things. They want to embrace that, which is what I love. So even if I do find that at some point, maybe I want to pivot a little bit, I think the first place I'm going to look is internally at Twitter, because, you know, a lot of companies will say, oh yeah, we want you to grow and learn, and we're open to you doing different things here. But, you know, in practice, it doesn't happen as often as they say. But I think it does happen in practice at Twitter, which is really encouraging.
So you found an organization that encourages growth and rewards initiative.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, that's a big thing. That's a big thing. Yeah. Okay. All right. Um, we have some questions about remote learning, which is it's absolutely going to be part of our fall term. We don't know whether it's going to be part of the spring term. But in terms of your regular interaction with remote communications, how would you suggest students enhance that process? What can they do themselves? Are there things they should check out, books they should read about that, or papers, or anything you can say about the idea of getting better at this, getting better at what we're doing here?
Yep. I think it's great that you guys, obviously the pandemic is a terrible situation, but I think one of the things that is good about it is that colleges and workplaces are having to really reevaluate and redefine how they go about teaching and learning and running their businesses, and just being able to do it every day. That's how you get better at it. It was part of our culture already at Twitter. So, I was on video calls with people every day, even before all this started. And it was funny to hear from my colleagues at the NFL who never did video calls, having to figure out this Zoom thing as if it was new. And I was thinking this was not a change for me at all. So I think just doing it, embracing it when the semester starts, I think will go a long way. And find ways, if you're in the study groups, normally as a student, you can still hop on a Zoom call, hop on a Google Hangout, and talk to your friends. It's the same thing you're doing anyway. A lot of people have done virtual happy hours. I mean, there's all sorts of ways you can utilize these services and not have to be necessarily doing a school project or doing something for work. This is, I think, a new normal for us, for a while at least. So just embrace it, and no books necessarily, just when you have the opportunity to use it, go for it.
That makes sense. I found students are somewhat trepidatious about that initial interaction in Zoom, and they find it to be kind of nerve-wracking and a little distancing. But after a while, they sort of get the rhythm of it. Some of them, like you, some of them have been doing it for such a long time, it's not a giant change for them. But there's an initial reluctance among some students who are just sort of like, I'm not there, so how's this going to work? Where we found it, we can kind of work it out. Mm-hmm. One of our semi-recent grads, more recent than you, Elise Kistler, a fine graduate of our program, she's asking about when it's time to jump. When you've made a couple of moves, how do you know? How do you know when? Is it an internal clock? Is it something within the organization? How do you know it's time to get on to something else?
Yeah, one of the things I hear often when I talk to students is that question. And I think is very much a personal value system, just figuring out what you value and how you want to spend your time. For me, everybody says, oh, you have a dream job. You were in your 20s working for the NFL, going to Super Bowls every year, doing this or that, hanging out with all these people. And, for me, at a certain point, it wasn't worth giving up the nights and the weekends or the family time during holidays. And, being quite frank, the money in sports isn't great. And so for me, it was more important to be valued for the work I was doing and being able to do work that I thought I was able to do, and not necessarily doing the work that was just on the job description, because it is so tough to break into new things. For me, I wanted to be able to be creative. I was tired of hearing, we've always done it this way, so we're always going to do it that way. And it's very much just, you'll know when it's time to make a move or when it's time to look into new things. You'll find that you're not getting the same things out of the job that stuck out before. And I think there's always a hesitancy to go and try new things because you haven't done it before and it's scary. That probably kept me in roles previously longer than I needed to be. There's always something, you can always do more than you think you can do. And you don't get what you don't ask for. And so I think those are two big lessons. Just being confident in yourself, you're your biggest ally. So making sure you speak up for yourself and ask for what you want. If you're not getting it in your current situation, then it's on you at that point to go elsewhere and find it.
And you're going to hear no in your career, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I think it's something all of us need to get the lesson on that. You will hear no in your career. That's not the end of the world. You just move on from there. More questions coming in about Twitter from Greg Offner, one of our students. Um, we know that Twitter is uh, being advantaged. There's an opportunity here for Twitter in terms of a general increase in volume and things like that. But are there initiatives uh, within the company? Are there brainstorming sessions going on to see what can we be doing better in this specific environment? How does that work?
Yeah. There have been, so I think a lot of the things that we've talked about during this time is that the pandemic for us here in the US started about March, late February and March, but we have offices all around the world, and this started in late December last year for people in Asia and people in our APAC offices. And because of that, we've been thinking about all this stuff for quite some time. Twitter itself had a task force to come together with people from HR and legal, our corporate security team, comms, and a variety of other departments where they were doing daily stand-ups to figure out the situation. When was the right time to have us go full remote and work from home? How are we going to support employees once they are at home? What technologies needed to be in place? What tools needed to be in place? In terms of things on the platform, we've done a lot of work the past 6 months in revamping some of our policies because of misinformation around coronavirus and COVID-19 and some of the conspiracy theory type stuff. And so we're just doing a lot of work to surface relevant, real, factual information for people because so many people are coming to Twitter to learn about what's happening in the world and where coronavirus is. And so there's a ton going on in terms of that type of stuff.
So we find the discussion of misinformation and incorrect information, either deliberate or not deliberate, to be relevant to Twitter.
Definitely. I think one of the big things, some of it is deliberate, but a lot of it sometimes, people are following somebody and that's just the voice that they're used to hearing, and they, amplification is huge. And so it's part of our job to make sure that if you're logging on Twitter, you're seeing factual information, because when it comes to coronavirus or other things that can cause off-platform harm, we want to make sure that we're not putting you in harm's way by having you share false information. It's important for us to make sure people around the world are seeing real, relevant information from credible sources.
I'm curious, what's your media diet? What's your go-to sources for things? What in the course of a regular business day or even on leisure time, what do you spend your time consuming?
Well, I joke that, before I loved Twitter before I started working at Twitter, and my wife used to complain, you're always on Twitter. And now at least I can say, well, they pay me to be on it. So, I mean, a lot of Twitter. The great thing I like about Twitter is that, I can find a lot of different perspectives about a topic very quickly. I'm a big proponent of just using our bookmarks feature. I bookmark tweets all day long and go back to them and read different actual news stories that I've seen on Twitter throughout the day. I don't consume a ton of TV news. I used to, and actually, I think the pandemic kind of, I've had a bit of a news fatigue a bit, because for a while there was every day was an update about new numbers increasing and deaths, and it was just tough to read it and look at it every day. And so, I'm trying to be a bit more careful and deliberate about the things I'm reading. But yeah, my news consumption starts with Twitter, just because it's up on my screen every day at work. It's so easy for me to get sucked in and go down different holes and find new things that way.
And how does being a father of a wonderful 3-month-old change your perspective on all of this?
Um, I don't, you learn, and I think I had a bit of this perspective leaving the NFL, and then even coming to Twitter too. Like, I don't know, work is important, your career is important, but so is you and your personal life. And a lot of times at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. You know, I think it's important to keep balance. And, when I look at my daughter now, it's just if I could bottle up the feeling when she's looking back at me, there's nothing like it. And just, you get worked up a lot and you spend a lot of time in your career and in your job. So find ways to make your job and your career give back to you. You shouldn't only be giving it to it, because at the end of the day, what you go home to is what really matters. So make sure that the time you're spending at work, you feel like is a valuable use of your time. It's easier said than done, I guess, now that I'm into my career 10 years later. I know the scramble and the franticness of, oh, I need a job when you're first leaving school, but you can find things where you're fulfilled, or the people you go to work with, find something that makes you feel like it's giving something to you beyond a paycheck.
So the job is one part of your life, but there are certainly other parts of your life as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's assume there are 10 students graduating this year. All 10 of you sent them their resumes. All of them are saying they saw you on this Zoom interview, and they were impressed. They want to get in contact with you, et cetera, et cetera. What are you looking for? What jumps out at you on a resume? What jumps out at you in terms of a package a person is offering? What says this is the kind of person we hire?
Well, again, I'll hammer home that writing thing again. Your resume is the first time people are going to be able to see your writing, or a cover letter. So making sure it's well written, edited well, you proofread it. In terms of the actual bullets, just show me that if you've given some thought to the position, even if your skill set or your role isn't exactly tailored to it, find a way to say, hey, I didn't pitch this type of media, but I worked with the media in this way. I ran events and did media operations. So I'm comfortable working with the media and building relationships. Just finding different ways to tailor what you've done to what's on the bullet points of the job description. And if you're applying to tech platforms or different technology, show that you know how to use that technology. You should probably have a Twitter account. You don't have to tweet every day, but show you have some sort of presence. If you're applying to LinkedIn, you should have a LinkedIn account. There's different ways to show that you're up on all these things. Put those things on your resume. Have a professional presence online. The first thing I do, I'll go to Google and I'll search for you, and I'll click on your Twitter account before I do anything else, before I go to your LinkedIn, just because I want to see what you're doing on our service. If you want to work at Twitter, you should probably be pretty comfortable using Twitter.
These are all great pieces of advice, and we really appreciate it. I think we're almost about out of time here. Any last words you have for words of wisdom in your vast experience?
Yeah, I think while you're at school or you're just graduating, utilize resources like Dr. Lorden, Dr. Thompson, who are on the call. Both of those guys, I know from my experience, they know everybody in this industry in the Philadelphia area and elsewhere. Utilize their networks. Just go to utilize office hours and figure out ways that they can help you. Again, you don't get what you don't ask for. So you would never know if you didn't ask that Dr. Lorden knows a guy who went to Westchester and went to his alma mater at Syracuse and worked for Twitter is a great connection. So, find a way to make connections like that. If you're in the TV, radio, Dr. T knows everybody. I remember he brought in Mark Zumoff to speak to us, and Mark and I connected after he came to our class, and we talked about the Sixers and the media industry. Utilize your resources at Westchester. People are there to help you, but you have to stick up for yourself and be proactive and ask, ask for what you want, because then people are able to help you.
Dr. T and I, second and third, what you're saying there, and all the professors in our department feel the same way about it. We are here for a resource for you, but you have to be standing out. You have to be, like Brendan's talking about, being a person who reaches out and does that. As well as our chair, Dr. Boyle, who's doing a ton of work making the program as marketable as possible, and the support we get from our dean, everybody over at the dean's office level. Brenden, we want to thank you very much. We really appreciate your time. We're proud of you. We are genuinely proud of you, not just for your successes, but for your effort and your worldview in terms of going out there and being brave and being bold and trying to make things work for yourself when they do, having that kind of success. And when they don't, finding a way to pick yourself back up and continue to do that. We really appreciate that. We're very happy that everybody has come on here for our first of our alumni speaker series. There will be more. Keep an eye out for them in your email. From Seth Birch, we'll be sending you some things along the way. But on behalf of the College of Arts and Humanities, we thank you all for joining us, and we thank Brenden for his time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great to see you, Brenden.